Hello, y'all. Welcome to Taxation is the Fest. I have the great privilege to introduce our first speaker, Michael Cheney. His presentation is The Banned Truth About Corona the Government Doesn't Want You to Know. Michael Cheney is a libertarian, entrepreneur, and podcaster. During the 20 years he's been running his own business, the government has stolen millions of dollars from him in taxation. So everybody, here is Michael Cheney. Welcome, Michael.
How's things?
Good. How are you?
I am good, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. It seems like you're having a few technical issues there with the sound and so on, so I'm glad we got that sorted out.
Yes, it's working itself out.
Cool. I'm also glad and privileged to be opening this event up. So I shall just dive right into it. Feel free to chip in at any time. I don't know if you want to interrupt or you want to ask me questions. Obviously, I don't have like a 60-minute monologue or whatever, but it'd be great to get your input on this as well.
Absolutely. Cool.
So yeah, what I really wanted to talk about today, obviously the whole weekend I know is all about taxation. As you said there in introduction, I've been unfortunate, I guess, in some respects with what I've experienced with the government. I've been fortunate in one regard that I've been an entrepreneur for the past 20 years. I've generated a lot of income with my business, but a large portion of that has been taken from me by the government, which really first sort of turned me on to the idea of taxation being theft and sort of libertarian ideals. I was then taken under the wing, I guess, by Tom Woods, who I know many of you will be familiar with. Tom and I did a number of joint projects together in our business, and he kind of taught me quite a bit about the libertarian scene as well. And then latterly, just last year, actually, it was my dad sadly passed away. And this was like the last straw for me, because my dad had worked really hard all his life for about 40 years as a teacher. And he had saved a lot of money during that time. And the government decided to take about $150,000, $160,000 from him in taxes from his estate. So this was after he passed away. So this was money that he'd already been taxed on. He was taxed at source when he worked, and he was taxed when he took dividends out from the investments that he'd made. But they also took $150,000 from him after he'd actually passed away. Now, for me, it didn't really matter to me financially, but from a principle point of view, that this man had worked so hard all his life, done the right thing, and saved and invested like they tell us we're supposed to do. And then had $150,000 taken by the government, which is definitely the last thing that he would have wanted, really just tipped me over the edge. So from that point forward, I became more vocal in my endeavors. And yeah, that's led me to currently really focusing on the coronavirus so-called crisis, because it's something that obviously is affecting all of us financially, and will continue to do so probably for the rest of our lives. Not just because of the lack of jobs and the loss of jobs, which we'll probably talk about, and the knock-on effects of the lockdown, but also the fact that we're going to end up paying for all this, right? Because there isn't a government dollar that doesn't come from you and I, and they're already talking about how all of the bailouts are going to be paid for and how they're going to start increasing taxes to do all this. So they're really hitting us from multiple sides right now. And whilst on the face of it, you might think, well, this is not a taxation related issue. It couldn't be more of a taxation related issue, because in the months and years ahead, we're all going to be paying more taxes unless obviously Dan Behrman gets into power. And that is going to be as a direct result of the coronavirus, as I say, so-called crisis that they're kind of ramming down our throats at the moment. So I really wanted to talk about that, the research that I've done, and all the scientific research that's coming out about the actual figures and so on. That's really what I wanted to get into in detail. But that's a little bit of background about why I'm covering this and why I got into this in the first place. So the first thing I want to go over is really starting right at the beginning, is the measurement of COVID deaths. Because all of this, the entire lockdown, if we remember, and it seems like many years ago now, but really it was just a few months, all stemmed from the Imperial College London report. There was an Imperial College London model. It was created primarily by Professor Neil Ferguson. This is a guy who's worked closely with government. He also helped put together the H1N1 avian flu modeling, which predicted millions of deaths, and obviously was way out. The first time this model came out, they said it's going to result in 500,000 deaths in the UK. We went into social distancing and lockdown as a result of that recommendation. And 24 hours after social distancing had been put in place, so there's no way that the social distancing could have had any effect within 24 hours, they amended that estimation from 500,000 dead in the UK to 20,000. And yet the measures that are still in place are still were still reflective of the figures that they initially put forward. Neil Ferguson was then brought in front of the Parliament in UK, and when they questioned him, he said by his own admission that 2/3 of the people that are being cited every day in the UK as dying with COVID, 2/3 of those, according to the lead scientist in the UK, 2/3 would have died anyway. Now, obviously, we're all going to die anyway, but he means would have died anyway, at the same time frame, right? So that means, and again, none of this is conspiracy theory. This isn't me dreaming up some theory. This is everything that I will say today is either from government advice or from scientific advice that scientists or doctors have said. None of it is my opinion or ideas. So he's the chief scientific advisor for the UK. He was. I'll come on to that in a second. And he said 2/3 of the deaths that you're seeing every day in the UK reported on the media. So they say, 500 people have died. Well, actually, no. 600 of those, if it's that figure, would have died anyway. The other thing to say is all the deaths all over the world, and this is something very subtle that they're doing, they are saying people have died with COVID-19. There's a huge difference between dying with COVID-19 and dying from COVID-19. You can die with skin. Most people die with skin unless you're in quite a critical lawnmower incident. It doesn't mean you've died because of skin. But that's what they're doing. The official status on this is if you are in a hospice, and again, this was a health official in the US in a press conference, basically saying, if you're in a hospice and you have 2 weeks to live and you die at that 2-week period, and you happen to have tested positive for COVID-19, you will be marked down as a COVID death. And they're doing this all over the place. There was a case I saw just this week. Somebody had fallen down at their home. They'd banged their head, and they were marked as a COVID death because they tested positive for COVID-19. Now, let's come back to this Professor Neil Ferguson, because this is a guy that the UK government was taking all their advice from, and he was driving a lot of their policy indirectly. And he was known informally in the UK as Professor Lockdown because he came up with these figures, and the lockdown came about as a result of it. Well, he was caught out because he lives in London, and he was having an affair, and his mistress had traveled across London twice during the lockdown period to have, let's just say, liaisons with him. This was featured in a newspaper. He admitted it, and he's now resigned from his post. So the guy who thinks this is so dangerous that we should all not leave our homes has basically been flouting the lockdown. There's numerous cases of people doing this. There's many mayors in the US, people going out for family dinners, meeting friends. There was a mayor in the US caught at a nail salon, even though she banned nail salons. There was a mayor in Spain who was caught driving and going out and about and having a drink because he said he was so stressed with the lockdown, like he's the only one that's affected by this. The health secretary here in Scotland, she had to resign because she traveled to a second family home across the country and told other people to stay at home and not visit family. There was another MP down in England. On Mother's Day, he famously went on TV and said, "Don't visit your mother. It's very important that we all stay at home, do a Skype call." He went to visit his parents on their doorstep. So it's a dual thing with this, that they're they're doing one thing, or they're saying that we should do one thing, that we should do as they say and not as they do, and that alone is bad enough. But on top of that, they're obviously not that worried about this, which makes you wonder, why is that? If they're saying this is so bad and we all need to stay at home and don't go outside and be social distance and everything else, why are they going about and visiting family? And so it does make you think. So that's really the first main issue, is this whole question mark over how the deaths have been reported. The data, quite bluntly, is either inaccurate or incomplete at the moment. They don't know, and they cannot tell us how many people have died because of COVID-19. I want to move on to Italy because, particularly in the early days, Italy was kind of listed as a kind of like a poster child, if you like, for the fearmongers. We don't want to be the next Italy. Everybody would say, "Oh, we don't want to be the next Italy. Look how bad it was over there." And again, I've got to emphasize here, I'm not saying this is not a virus. Of course, it is a virus. Yes, it can be dangerous. It has killed lots of people. We know that. But it's not as bad as they're saying it is. And the measures that they've put in place are not commensurate with the lethality and the mortality of this virus. They're just not. Now, they were using Italy as a case initially to try and prove this, but the numbers were wrong. According to the Italian Institute of Health, so this is the official government Institute of Health in Italy. Again, this is not me making this up. This is not some, tinfoil hat lunatic. This is their own health board. According to them, only 12% of their reported COVID-19 deaths actually listed COVID-19 as the cause of death. 99% of them had at least one serious comorbidity, and 80% of them had two such diseases. So that puts a whole new light on this, how bad it was in Italy. And yeah, a lot of people died, obviously, and it's tragic. Every death is tragic. I'm not undermining that or belittling that. What I'm trying to get to the bottom of is, how bad is COVID-19, and what are they doing to try and exaggerate that so that they can implement various things. So if you look at the deaths in Italy and you say, well, actually, let's wipe out 88% of those because that COVID-19 wasn't the death, suddenly it paints a whole new picture of what we were actually dealing with. Then if you say that 99%, as they were saying here, had at least one underlying condition, and sometimes more than one, again, it shows you that this is not as bad as they are making out. So in the media, you'll see many stories, and it's kind of become one of my favorite hobbies now, somewhat sadistically, to spot mainstream media news stories when they're talking about COVID-19 deaths. There's been a number in the UK. The headline will always say died from COVID-19 or latest, coronavirus victim. And you'll always need to read about 2 or 3 paragraphs down to get to the part where it says such and such had an underlying cause. Such and such had been seriously ill for months. Such and such was actually admitted to hospital because of a kidney infection. But the main headline is latest coronavirus victim. And then you read on, you get to the details, and actually they were in hospital for something else. They tested positive for COVID-19. And then it goes down as a COVID-19 death and COVID-19 story. The other thing to mention is they're not even testing all the deaths. They're not even testing all the people that they say are dying from COVID-19. There's a huge number that are being put down as COVID-19 deaths on a death certificate, and they've not even had a test. And they won't ever be tested. It's basically guesswork on the part of the doctor, and they've been put under pressure. They received a letter. Many of the doctors in the US received a letter from the CDC recommending that if they see anything that looks like it could be COVID, to put it down as a COVID-19 death, even if they're not able to do a test. Now, of course, COVID-19 symptoms are somewhat wide-ranging. A temperature, a cough, a headache, there's new. So people that have been admitted with pneumonia-type conditions or influenza-type conditions, it would be fairly easy for doctors to put that down as a COVID-19 death. And I don't blame them for doing that because they're under pressure and they've got a job to do. But the CDC has handed down this directive to do that, and it's skewing the figures. We've got to really look back to the AIDS virus and the HIV epidemic to see, well, is this reporting usual? Is this normal? Is this normally what goes on in this kind of crisis? And it's actually not. In the HIV epidemic, deaths were listed, and they had the data very, very exact when the person had first been infected and the date of death. That has not been given to us at the moment for some unknown reason. We're just told every day this is how many deaths there are. We don't know when they died. We don't know when they contracted the virus. So what this leads to is a misunderstanding and a misrepresentation in the media and for the general population of what is actually going on. For example, there was a day in the UK when they said 700 people have died today. You know, the day's figure today is 700 deaths from COVID-19. Well, it turns out they'd actually taken the deaths from a 4-week period prior, badged them all in. There was some sort of lag with reporting, and they'd bundled them all in to that day. And this was only discovered after the event. So these are the kind of things that are important if you're going to be making decisions about people's livelihoods and, locking people down and affecting kids. I literally was 10 minutes ago, was on a walk with my kids. We are allowed outside now twice a day in Scotland. And we were out. I was on my bike. My kids were on like little scooters. My kids are 6 and 8. We cycled past their friend's house. My little boy is 6 years old, and he started crying because he's not seen his friend for several weeks. Now, that's a minor thing. It's not going to affect him for life, you would hope. But it shows you the impact this is having. I saw just this week in France, they've started putting some kids back to school, but they're still isolating them in school. So they've got to walk along a line on the floor to their desk. At playtime, they have a chalk square on the floor, and they have to sit in that square at playtime. They cannot play with each other in a schoolyard. Now, if anyone wants to tell me that this lockdown is not going to have a long-term effect, or that the lockdown is merited based on the information that we've received, it's just not true. So that's really the stage that we're at. Again, coming back to Italy, I'll go off track a little bit. As you can see, I do get animated about this stuff, because I've spent a lot of time looking into this. It's really been my full-time job almost since the first broke at the end of January. I was like, no, this doesn't feel right. I want to find out what's going on. And some people are trying to do the same. Some people are just going with the headlines that they see. And some people are believing that, the mouthpieces that they see on the media and believe in government. I'm saying, well, no, let me delve deeper. Let me delve deeper. And that's what I'm sharing with you today. So, again, going back to Italy, as we said, the figures are way skewed. The other thing about Italy, which they didn't make a big deal of, big surprise, is that it's got the second oldest population in the entire world, second only to Japan. They also have very bad air quality, particularly in northern Italy. You can look this up on Google. It's very easy to find. So they've had serious respiratory issues in the north of Italy for a long time. So they've got a combination of high number of elderly individuals. I mean, on average, they're 10 years older than most of the rest of Europe on average. So, of course, there's going to be more deaths in that age group. As we've said, by their own admission, only 12% of the deaths that they recorded were actually listing COVID-19 as a cause. So that was Italy. I want to move on to talk about Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci, and the World Health Organization. Now, this is at risk of us getting censored. It seems whenever I mention these three things in combination, I've had 2 YouTube videos deleted this week, and I've had a podcast deleted from Spotify, both related to this particular issue. And again, this is all information that's readily available on the World Health Organization website and places like Wikipedia. It's not, it's not tinfoil hat stuff. I'm not blaming 5G for coronavirus here. This is just data that I'm sharing. So the first thing I want to share is a video that I put out yesterday on Facebook, which I found absolutely remarkable. I don't know if you've seen this. Tony Fauci was in a press conference, and he basically said, what's going to happen is if people get if enough people get infected, they will develop a background immunity. Okay, he said, what I hope doesn't happen is that so many people get infected that we get herd immunity. Now, he's caught on camera saying this. Anthony Fauci, one of the lead scientific advisors, saying, I hope not so many people get infected that we get herd immunity. Now, let's just think about that for a second. Herd immunity is what we need to escape this virus. It's the only thing that will get us out of this situation that we're in. According to Professor Witkowski, this is a guy, again, he's one of the people who's been censored on YouTube. He's been an epidemiologist for 30 years. He said herd immunity is the only thing that's going to get us out of this. If enough people get infected that are not vulnerable, not old people and immunocompromised, but other people, if enough people get infected, that is a good thing. It will build up herd immunity. And Professor Witkowski said this is what happened in China. They didn't lock down early because they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what this virus was. A large group of the population built up herd immunity, and that's why they were able to squash this early in China. Now, that's his opinion. He's got 30 years experience as an epidemiologist. Now, I do know, of course, there are alternative theories to that. Maybe it was because China was so authoritarian with their lockdown. Maybe they're lying about the figures. That's theory. Professor Witkowski has over 30 years experience as an epidemiologist, and he believes it's because they built herd immunity, because they didn't lock down quickly. Everyone else locked down super quickly because they were reacting to this, sort of trying to react before it had kind of kicked into place. So going back to the Anthony Fauci quote, which I put over on, I'm going to give my website a quick plug here, plandemic.tv. I've got the video, all the banned videos I've got on there. I've taken them from YouTube before they got banned. Anthony Fauci in this press conference said, I hope that not too many people get infected so that we don't want to get herd immunity, basically is what he's saying. And I thought, I literally have watched it. It's a 30-second clip, and I've watched it about 10 times. I still cannot believe that he said this. He didn't correct himself. It wasn't taken out of context. Why would he not want us to get herd immunity? I can understand him saying we don't want to get infected. But as we know, 99% of people that get infected by this thing have no symptoms and recover completely. You know, the death rate of this thing is minuscule. So why would he not want herd immunity? Again, I'm not going to, I'm putting the dots there. You can join them or you can kick them to the curb. It's up to you. So we'll talk about the World Health Organization next. So I wanted to do some digging on the World Health Organization. So what I did is I went to their website and I found a financial report for the people that donate to the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is not independent. It's not impartial. It's funded by governments and it's funded by businesses and individuals. That's where it gets its money. Every year up until 2017, they released a financial report every year of who was giving money to them and how much money was being donated. That stopped for some reason. The report stopped in 2017. Again, it's just another dot there that I'll leave hanging. But the report in 2017 did have a number of line items that were of interest to me. What I basically did in this report, and you can go find it, you'll find it on the WHO website, is I just wanted to look at the high value items, the ones that were the most amount of money. Okay, I'm worried about looking at all the minute little things. Now, bearing in mind, they get over $2 billion a year donated to them from government and organizations. So the biggest donor from an organizational point of view is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is for the year 2017. All these figures were for 2017 because that's the latest year that we have. He donated $324 million that year to the World Health Organization. The next one that caught my eye was the Gavi Alliance, Gavi. This is the Vaccine Alliance. They donated $133 million. I thought I'd do a little bit of research on them. They were founded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I then moved on. There was an organization called the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. They gave $16 million. and I thought I'd have a little bit of a look and see what that was. And they were founded by 4 individuals, including Bill and Melinda Gates. I then found the CDC Foundation are also in here. So obviously that's connected to CDC in USA. They donated $3 million. World Bank are in there, $145 million. Obviously, Bill Gates has partnered with them on numerous initiatives for vaccinations and so on in Africa. There was a company called Population Services International, PSI, which caught my eye just because of the name alone. Went on their website and found one of their key development partners was Bill Gates. I also found Rotary. They gave $62 million. And who partners with Rotary? Bill Gates, of course. Who else? I found UnitAid. They donated $29.9 million. Who paid them $50 million in 2017? Bill Gates. There's also a company, Vital Strategies. They donated $10.6 million to the World Health Organization. Who contributed $225 million to Vital Strategies Organization for one of their initiatives? Bill Gates, of course. Who else? And it goes on. I won't list them all, but it goes on. You can basically read this report. They're all pretty much almost all of them are pharmaceutical companies that are paying money to the World Health Organization. And many of them have received millions of dollars from Bill Gates, or he founded them, or he's had some vested interest, or he's on a joint panel with them. Okay, not all of them, but most of them. As you said, I could keep going, but it gets to the point where we get the point. Okay, Bill Gates has got his finger in that pie. So what's the point of all this? Well, does it seem fair that an organization that is getting its money from vaccine makers should be the same organization that gets to declare what is a pandemic and what is not pandemic? It doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't seem impartial. It doesn't seem proper that there should be an organization like this that has such a vested interest in supporting its donors also has a responsibility for declaring what is a pandemic or not. They were picked up on this during the swine flu outbreak by a number of UK activists and politicians trying to push the issue that, look, the only people that benefited from this swine flu outbreak were the vaccine manufacturers. The World Health Organization declared a pandemic based on inaccurate data. There was no pandemic. Not many people died, but all these vaccines were created. All this money was made. What's going on? We don't agree. And they put this thing together, and obviously it got squashed. Because if you're going up, against the World Health Organization, Bill Gates, all the governments of the world, the Rockefeller Institute, how are you going to come? You're not going to come out of that unscathed. But it's not the first time that this kind of thing has been thought about. So I just want to leave that there. Again, I'm not going to join the dots. It's just something to think about. It seems fishy at best. It seems suspect at absolute best. Some of the other donors, by the way, include Imperial College London. Bill Gates has also given millions of dollars to Imperial College London. These are the guys that created the report that then led to it being a lockdown. Bill Gates has also paid over $10 million to Professor, I think it's Christopher Whitty, who is also one of the chief medical advisors in the UK to do with coronavirus. He's paid him over $10 million in the past for one of his initiatives. So Gates is in bed, if you like, with a lot of the key players here, with Imperial College London, the vaccine manufacturers, and the scientists that are developing these models to declare that this is a pandemic. And again, whether or not there's anything shady going on there, we'll never know. But even if there isn't, it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't, it's just ethics 101. There's too many interested parties making decisions in a biased way, or potentially to have a biased impact on that. I want to move on. I've got 6 points, and I'm bang on target. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back here. So I'm moving on to point 4, which is the ineffectiveness of the lockdown. because we might say what people are going to try and say, the government's going to try and say now is, well, look, we've flattened the curve now. It's all gone down and everything's worked. Look at this lockdown, it was an absolute rip-roaring success. Well, firstly, we're past the flattening of the curve. The curves at the moment are really, really right on the way down. The CDC, let me see if I can, I'm going to see if I can show you something from here on a second, on my screen, 1 second. On the 17th of April, the CDC basically gave some data at a presidential briefing here. Let me just see if I can show this 1 second. You should be able to see that. You don't need to see the actual detail of this graph, but I just want to, just so you can see the red lines here, the peaks here, okay? This is the important thing here. So this is CDC data. Again, this is not my data. This is not something that somebody else has dreamt up. This is CDC data. And there are 3 peaks that you can see here. This red line is hospital admissions. Now, I didn't realize this, by the way. I didn't do the research to work out what's going on here. This was done by Professor Witkowski. Remember, he's the epidemiologist with 30 years experience. He's not been paid by the government or Big Pharma. He's been censored on YouTube. And he basically says this is from a system that measures hospital intakes in the US for flu-like symptoms, coughs, temperatures, respiratory issues. So you can see the first one was the first peak. This was in about December 2019. Okay, it's got nothing to do with COVID. You could maybe even read it here, influenza. Okay, this is the first peak. Interesting to note that that peak for influenza is higher than the peak for COVID that was over here. But anyway, we'll come on to that in a second. Influenza, December 19. We've then got a second peak of, this is hospital admissions. It's not deaths. It's how many people have been admitted to hospital with these type of symptoms. We've then got a second peak in January, February 2019. This again is for influenza. And we've got a slightly lower peak for COVID-19 on March 18th. Now, Professor Witkowski pulled this graph up and said he didn't even mention the fact that the COVID-19 is less than the influenza, which to me is interesting. Oh, okay, admittedly, there are 2 peaks for influenza. But if you to believe the media and everything you see on the news every day, if you watch it, I don't. But if you do, you'd expect COVID to be like right up here in Mars, based on what they're telling us. But anyway, that's really not the point. The point is the date of this peak, okay? Because it is an actual peak. That was the peak of admissions for coronavirus in the US, hospital admissions in the US, okay? That date, March the 18th. Okay, from that period onwards, the number of people going into hospital with COVID-19 symptoms went down. Okay, went down. So that was the peak of the virus. There's no other way of saying it. If you've got the most people going into hospital at a certain time, the peak of the virus was probably even before then. Because you're not going to go in the moment that you catch it. Oh, I've caught the virus. I can tell. I've got the virus. I've got the virus. I've got to get to hospital. No, it's going to take you a few days. You're going to suffer for a little bit. You think, oh, it's just the flu or whatever, or it's just a cold. Oh, no, it seems a bit worse. Okay, I'll go to hospital. So the peak was at the very, very latest was the March the 18th. And yet the lockdown in the US didn't occur until after this. So he's basically saying that he feels the lockdown was like the horse had bolted. It was like trying to shut the gate after the horse had already bolted. So again, is this lockdown effective? Well, the point is the peak had been passed, right? When most of the lockdowns have been put in place around the world, the virus was already on the way out. The virus is already on the way out. It's a flu-like virus. The coronavirus is a series of viruses. We're now calling it coronavirus, but it's COVID-19. A coronavirus can be, the flu or common cold or any of these different things. And like all of them, they come for a few weeks. People develop herd immunity, and then it goes, right? It goes away and it's done. And that's what's happened in this case. You can see the peak there. So does the lockdown work, or has the lockdown been effective? It really hasn't. And again, that's not my opinion. Well, it is my opinion, but it's not just my opinion. It's the data from Professor Witkowski, over 30 years epidemiologist, and others, many others that I've found, stating that the herd immunity is really, the only saving grace that we've got here is getting people out, adopting like the model in Sweden, where you keep the vulnerable safe, right? So you protect the elderly and the immunocompromised, but you get everybody else going about, the people that are fit and healthy, the kids that aren't affected by this. I mean, very, very few children have died from this. I mean, obviously, it's tragic that they have, but it's minuscule amount. So why are we shutting schools down? We should be getting kids going to school, picking this virus up, surviving, right? Bringing it home, obviously protecting those that are vulnerable, but building up that herd immunity so that we can go about our business and, keep the economy rolling and everything else. Because we've got to pause and talk briefly now about the knock-on effect of this lockdown. There was a piece that came out from UNICEF. This is I think it's a global children's charity sort of health organization, I believe, just this week. And they predict 2 million children will die as a result of the lockdown measures around the world. The fact that everything's been put in this lockdown, the shrinking of the economy, that's what they're predicting. 2 million kids will die. That's what they're saying. Now, if we look at just the economic downturn alone, last time there was anything like this was in the economic collapse of 2008. And figures show that over 200,000 people died from cancer. I know this sounds weird. I'll explain it in a second. 200,000 people died from cancer in 2008 as a result of the economic collapse. Now, that sounds like some wacky shit. Like, what? Basically, the study was done, and because people couldn't get access to healthcare because they were out of work or they didn't have income or they lost all their savings because of the economic downturn, there were 200,000 avoidable cancer deaths during that financial downturn. Now, again, that's not theory, that's a fact. Somebody's actually done the numbers and looked at that. Now, if you've seen a graph, and you've seen any of these graphs about the recession and what's going to happen with this lockdown, obviously we're now, I don't know, tens of millions of people unemployed in the US and obviously worldwide as well. The downturn as a result of this is going to be astronomical. So who knows what that number is going to be? But it's going to be dramatically, sadly, higher, right, than what was there before. So this is what we talk about in sort of libertarian point of view is, the unseen impact, right? We have the seen where people say, oh, well, look at the lockdown and, this is how many people we've prevented from dying. They came up with this whole thing back in the day of saying, if it only saves one life, surely it's worth crippling the entire global economy and locking us all down and, giving our children emotional problems for the rest of our lives if we can save the life of one person. But it's just not. It's not the case, right? These are huge ramifications that we're going to be paying for generations. The economic downturn, the people that are unemployed, the number of deaths that we're going to see from nutrition, from lack of nutrition, from poverty, from depression, obviously suicides, domestic abuse. It just goes on and on. It goes on and on. And these, the do-gooder sort of Karen brigade that are peering out their window and saying, oh, hey, you've already been for one walk today. Get back in your house. It's like, do you not realize what's going on? It's like the masks thing. This is something else that's really bugging me at the moment, is this idea of wearing masks. There was a study done, and it was called a meta study. Before I started getting into this, I had no idea what a meta study was. A meta study is a study of studies. And this meta study, looked at 17 previous studies that had been done about the efficacy of masks. And in a nutshell, and you can go and find this, just go and find it, scientific research, or how effective are masks. Don't look at anything current, for God's sake. You'll come up with anything on NBC and CNN and Fox News and all that bullshit. Find the actual scientific research, and you'll find 17 detailed studies that were done that say there is they're not effective. They cannot stop a virus. Now, They've not been tested on COVID-19. All of these studies were done, because obviously coronavirus didn't exist back then. All the studies were done on influenza, which for the purposes of this is the closest thing that we've got. Now, they're telling us, again, if we're to trust the media, coronavirus is like, influenza with guns and knives. Then if it can't stop influenza, how is it going to stop coronavirus, right? And it can't stop influenza. A cloth mask cannot stop it. It's like trying to stop a mosquito with a wire fence. It doesn't work. Even the N95 masks are not going to work. Okay. Now, they do offer some protection, obviously, for the medical staff that are on the front line. They're getting, like being blunt, bodily fluids thrown at them through their job. Fair enough. But for, you and I walking down the street, people driving in their car with a mask on, it's not going to do shit. I mean, even Anthony Fauci himself has gone on record as saying there's no point wearing masks. People, we see them over in, the Far Eastern countries. He was saying on this bit on 60 Minutes, I think it was. You see them doing that. If you want to do it, it's fine for peace of mind, but it's not going to offer you any benefit. In fact, it can do negative. It can do negative effects to your health, because obviously you're breathing back in that carbon monoxide. If you're healthy, do not wear a mask. Okay. I did, however, see just yesterday, there was a clip of Fauci wearing a mask for some reason. So I don't know. They say follow the science, but only when it suits them. There's 17 studies that have been done comprehensively showing that masks don't work. They say, well, don't follow that science because that doesn't really fit what we're saying. Wear a mask because it makes it seem a lot scarier. Or whatever. I don't know.
Well, I gotta ask, because I make masks. Of course, there's the Taxation and theft mask. That's what's been going around. And, I've had a lot of people purchase, mainly because if they have to wear a mask to avoid getting arrested, especially if they have, children, they don't want to risk leaving their children at home alone. So they're going to go ahead and go with the orders. And so they want to make a statement while doing so, which I love the idea. Of course, that's why I created it. And I agree with the independent individual saying, this is for my own peace of mind. And I don't think anybody should be shamed for that choice. But I do think that everybody, like you said, needs to be very well informed on the scientific studies done with that. And yeah, I do have a couple of questions if you're ready.
Fire away, yeah.
Okay. So the one new thing that I've seen recently, and of course I stopped watching the news probably at the very beginning of this. Right. My husband was tracking all this stuff, like you said, kind of like back in January and February. So he was like my daily news source, because he was like you, like just going on and finding the statistics, and he was doing his own math, and then he was making his own theories and saying things don't add up. So, but one of the new things I've seen on social media is there's children and a new illness that is being caused by COVID-19. I didn't read a whole lot into it, but at first it was like, oh my gosh, we have this new pandemic that we're going to have to worry about, and it's affecting children. So everybody needs to stay indoors. We're going to give you more information when it comes available. And then it says, oh, by the way, now it's created or it's caused by COVID-19. Have you been following this? And what are your thoughts on that besides media manipulation?
Right. I haven't been, I've seen it. I've seen the headlines, but no, I haven't dived into that area yet. I mean, as you can imagine, there's so much. It started out, it's so bizarre, this. It started out in January, and I would have to really scour around to find stuff, to find the data, find the research, find the stories, if you like, of what was happening. Now, I mean, people are sending me stuff every day. Have you seen this? Have you seen? I'm like, holy shit! It's just, it's going crazy. So, I did see that. I don't know anything about it. I do know that they are. It seems to me, and again, I will preface this. This is pure speculation, but they do seem to be scrambling a little bit at the minute to change the narrative, if you like. In the UK specifically, they said, I think they said in the US as well, initially, we need to stay at home to protect the health service. Because if we don't stay at home, oh my word, it's going to be overwhelmed. It's going to be the health service is just going to, we're not going to be able to survive. They're going to be overwhelmed. That didn't happen. Now, of course, they're going to say it's because of the lockdown. Sailing the.
In fact, it's the other way around. My sister is a nurse, and she's been laid off.
Right.
She's a nurse, and she's been laid off because she does post-surgical wound care in the hospital. And like since the ICU and emergency staff, like the trauma staff and nurses, they're not having as much patient admittance, that they have no work, but they're full time and they're needed because of, I guess, their level, that they were like, oh, well, we have to keep them busy. So they're now going to do the wound care for post-surgical, patients. And so she has been pushed out of a job, and she's not the only one. I have family up in Missouri who are dealing with the same thing. They work in hospitals outside of Chicago, and they're like, we're twiddling our thumbs, and that they're not reporting on that. And it's causing, a lot of people are thinking, oh, thank God for our nurses. Well, yeah, in certain, and first responders, yeah, in certain areas, I could see that. Maybe like you said, with New York having really bad air quality and pollution, that could possibly follow with what's happening in Italy and the numbers being a little bit skewed and a little bit higher. But, it's been insane that there's a lot of stories and narratives that haven't been told. So with that, what I want to go back to the economic impact. And of course, you said we're going to be looking at a lot more deaths that are caused by the economic impact of government intrusion rather than the actual virus itself. What are some things you think people can do to maybe try to avoid any negative impact from the economy?
Wow, that's a good question. I think everybody's thinking that right now. I mean, I'm fortunate, and I tried to teach other people this over the past 20 years. I've been running an online business for the last 20 years. So strangely, to a large extent, my day-to-day life at the minute is not that different to usual, other than the fact I'm homeschooling my kids and my kids are around a lot more. It's not that much different. Obviously, I can't go out as much. Here in the UK, we're still under this, we can go out. It used to be once a day, and then we can now go out twice a day. But I've been telling people for 20 years, get online, get a side hustle going on the internet. It's not difficult to get started. And you don't need stock. You don't need physical goods. You don't need staff. You don't need an office. You can sell digital products. You can either create a digital product of your own, or you can find other people that have already made those, and you can promote those products. So you basically, this is called affiliate marketing, right? So you essentially find a group of people that are looking for something online. Could be, cooking ebook, or, particularly nowadays, like homeschooling information or anything kind of digital, right? Find people that are looking for that, find a product that's for sale that offers that, and put the two together. And you get paid for doing that. And I've been doing this full time, I say, since the year 2000, and it's given me a lot of freedom in my life to kind of work when I want. I can work from wherever I like, as long as I've got, from wherever I like, as long as I have an internet connection. So that's something I've always been telling people, is to try and get a backup plan, basically, in place. And I think the internet is always been the way forward. Particularly with what's happening now, they're moving more towards virtual working. I mean, Twitter announced, I think, this week that they're going to allow people to work from home forever now. That they don't want them back in the office, or maybe not that they don't want them, but they're happy for them to work from home. So we are going to get to a position, and again, this is part of their motive as well, or at least something that they're throwing on the wagon anyway. Getting to a position where more people are working remotely, separate to one another through the internet.
Well, one quick question, last one, because we're gonna have to let free up for the next next up, which is Bill Levin. How did it feel when Plandemic became viral? Like it's been shared to me by so many times. Like, how did that feel?
Well, this is the weird thing. I'm not connected with a Plandemic movie. Okay. I registered plandemic.tv before the movie came, before anybody said anything about the movie.
Has anybody assumed, besides myself,
Yeah.
obviously?
Yeah, no, a lot of people have assumed, and not in a good way, because a lot of people have kind of said, oh, it's all debunked, and it's just one individual. So I've had to try and separate myself from that a little bit. I did try reach out to the guy initially and say, look, is there a way that we could maybe help one another? But then when I did more research on the individual, and more people were talking about it, it's, oh God, it's not that, is it? And I'm like, well, no, that's got nothing to do with it. But obviously I'd already invested in the brand and the name, so I just kind of stuck with it. I do have another domain name as well, which I've been using, which is coronatruth.com. But what I found is when I was using that on Facebook, I was getting less reach. They actually clamped down. You'll find this also on YouTube now. It's very difficult to find any independent information about corona or COVID on YouTube now. It just all gets buried. And that's what was happening with when I posted that domain name. So I got Plandemic because I thought it was a little bit more generic. And then about 3 weeks after that, this movie kicked off. And it was crazy. So I don't know what's going on with that, because I know they stripped that down. I know they pulled it down. Mm-hmm. Last time I had a quick look at the website, it said coming soon rather than the video. So I don't know. I don't know if he's in a bunker or if he's been Epsteined or what.
Yeah, right. So thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate your time and all the information that you have given all of us to look into the situation a lot more with a different point of view and perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and say thank you so much, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce the next guest, or at least say, guys, stick around. We have a lot more coming. Stay tuned for Bill Levin and his Church of Cannabis. So we're going to wrap up and see y'all later.
Take care.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.